Frank Turek's been around for a while now and is one of the heavyweights in the Christian apologetics space. He's written several books including I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist and Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. At the beginning of this video, Brandon introduces Frank and does a bit of commentary on his ministry and this conversation that he's about to have. But I'm going to go ahead and skip that and go ahead and get to the conversation itself. I'll put a link to Brandon's full video in the description below.
Hi, I'm Kyle.
Hey, Kyle.
I'm an atheist.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Of course. I love hearing these kind of debates and stuff. You asked why would you be an atheist if you possibly might know if God exists? My answer to that question is simple. It's just the fact that there's so many terrible things in the Bible. Like at one point, Jesus says to one of his disciples, "It's great that they're torturing their slaves here, but only lightly. Even though they did nothing wrong, it's great that they're doing it." He doesn't give any reason to why he says that he doesn't do anything. I don't understand why you would want to follow such a God. My question to you is why you would follow such a God.
I spent way more time than I'd care to admit hunting for an account of Jesus hanging out with one of his disciples, pointing out some random slaves and saying, it's great that they're torturing them only a little, even though they did nothing wrong. I can't be 100% sure, but I think the passage Kyle is referring to is Luke 12:47 through 48. The servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what the master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. If this is what Kyle is referring to, then he's misrepresenting the text. It's more likely an allegory for how people are held responsible for their own actions depending on how much information they have compared to others with lesser information. Wait, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked? Did Jesus say with great power comes great responsibility?
Uncle Ben?
Kyle asked a basic question people have been asking for a long time. Why does the Bible advocate things that we as a society at large find abhorrent, such as beating of slaves? Now, this passage isn't a good example because it's not technically endorsing slavery, but using it as an allegory, something relatable that people of that time could understand. But there are plenty of other passages that specifically endorse slavery. For example, Exodus 21, where Hebrew slaves only stay for 6 years and then when they're released. But if they were married or had children while enslaved, the family had to remain with the master permanently. Then it's up to the slave to decide whether he wants to stay with his family permanently or if he wants to just get up and leave. Basically, the master is holding the slave's family hostage. Or maybe a few verses later, where slaves can be beaten as much as the owner wants as long as the slave isn't killed or blinded in both eyes. Here's a juicy one. Numbers 31:17 through 18 commands all conquered men, boys, and women be killed, but that God's people should keep all the virgin girls for themselves. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys guess what exactly they're going to do with those girls. And then there's the New Testament, which is supposed to set up the new covenant and the ways to live in the new covenant. There's no condemnation of slavery whatsoever. Instead, it specifically commands all servants to obey their masters, the reasonable as well as the unreasonable, with fear and trembling. And that's just to name a few. But anyway, it ultimately doesn't matter what Kyle's passage was because Frank never addresses Kyle's concern. Let's see.
Let's not even look at the context of that passage. Let's just assume what you said is 100% true. Okay? As an atheist, why is that wrong?
Why is that wrong?
Yeah.
Morally, I would think that each and every human being here is the same. We all have the same rights. We all have the same wants and needs. I think we all should do the same. I think that we should, especially the God that we should follow, should have higher expectations of knowing such a thing.
Okay, but you seem to be assuming that certain things are really right and people have certain rights, even if there is no God. How do you justify that? What's your standard of rightness? If there's
My
no God?
standard of rightness would be a fair society.
What do you mean by fair?
fair, everything is equal. I personally, I have nothing wrong. I find nothing wrong with a communistic state. That's just my opinion. I don't think it's something to be afraid of. Everybody seems to be afraid of it.
Okay.
In the United States at least. But that's just my thought of fairness, is the idea that all humans should be the same.
Frank completely ignores Kyle's question and instead goes on the offensive, asking Kyle how atheists can even have a moral standard if they don't even believe in an intelligent moral standard giver. The onus isn't on Kyle to provide a defense of an atheist having a moral framework. Kyle is asking a question on the moral consistency of this specific belief system. Before moving on, I just wanted to point out how badly this conversation starts.
As an atheist, why is that wrong?
Why is that wrong?
Yeah.
I would argue that it's less about whether it's wrong and more about the Bible's consistency. Ask any reasonable question if slavery is wrong, and they'll admit that it is. Ask them why the Bible condones it, and they'll find a lot of hoops to jump through about how they are fearfully and wonderfully made or made after the image of God. But not once does the Bible speak out directly against slavery. If Christians build their moral framework on the God of the Bible, then where do they get off saying slavery is wrong? The fact of the matter is, they can't. It simply became inconvenient to believe that there was nothing wrong with slavery in a more progressive world.
But you seem to be assuming that certain things are really right and people have certain rights, even if there is no God. How do you justify that? What's your standard of rightness?
Easy. Our standard of rightness is treating others with a level of dignity without encroaching on their ability to do as they wish, as long as they don't harm or remove the liberties of others. In the most basic of terms.
My standard of rightness would be a fair society.
What do you mean by fair?
Fair, everything is equal. I personally, I have nothing wrong. I find nothing wrong with a communistic state. That's just my opinion.
No idea where he's going with this, but seeing as it doesn't really go anywhere, we're just going to ignore this. I'll talk about communism more in a future video.
Stay on target.
Okay, so it's your thought of fairness. What if Hitler has a different idea of fairness? Is he wrong?
He's not wrong.
Hitler's not wrong.
No, Hitler was definitely wrong.
He is not, well, in a kind of idea that we all have our own opinions. I feel like we should take the utilitarian view and go with what is best for the most amount of us.
Also, not going to address utilitarianism because that's a whole other can of worms.
Stay on target.
Okay, but what do you mean by best?
What would mean the greatest positives for the most amount of people?
Okay, but you're assuming that you're assuming there's a best out there. You're assuming a moral law. Where does that moral law come from if there's no God?
I personally just think that human beings should be able to make up their own laws. I mean, each people in time have found their own moral laws, and I think that they become better and better over time.
Better, but you wouldn't even know what better was unless you knew what best was. So I'm asking you, what is your standard of best?
What? No, you don't.
Nope. Nope. Nope.
I can't definitively tell you which food is the absolute best for my health because that food doesn't exist. But I can damn well tell you that broccoli is better for me than a McDonald's hamburger. I can't determine the farthest point in space from planet Earth, but I can certainly tell you that the moon is a hell of a lot closer than Saturn. You don't necessarily have to identify the definitive when determining whether one thing is necessarily better than another.
To say that certain people are closer to the best or better than others. What's the standard? Is it just your opinion, or is there something beyond your opinion which says this is good?
Well, I mean, we've all heard about utopias and a perfect society and things like that. That would be great in a way, but also we've all seen like the books like Huxley's, I believe, I forget what it's called, but he makes a book on this perfect
world?
society. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
It's that perfect society that everybody's perfect, there's no murder, there's no any of that.
Okay, but the question is, and maybe I'm just not stating it properly, what's wrong with murder if there's no God? Why shouldn't I kill other people to get what I want if there's no God?
Because it doesn't help society.
Why do I care about society?
Because we as a group should worry about society. We should be making the betterment of ourselves.
To put it in an oversimplified manner, murder is wrong because we're killing another member of the tribe. We're a social species, and we've come to rely on societies to cultivate prosperity for our tribe of human beings. You should care about society because aside from developing the ability to use tools, working together has been the greatest means to our success. It's allowed us to organize, dominate predators who are naturally more formidable than humans. It's also led to the development of trade so we can specialize and further our technological prowess.
But Kyle, you're importing a moral law into a frame that has no moral law. As an atheist, you're trying to say there is no God, which means there is no standard of rightness out there, but I'm saying this is my personal standard of rightness, which would mean somebody else could come along like Hitler or Stalin and say, Kyle, if there's no standard beyond neither you or me, then I can do whatever I want, including killing you to get what you have.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point.
No, it's not a very good point. It's actually a very bad one. Because humans are independent thinking beings who've evolved an innate need to survive, to look out for oneself and its needs. Some might call this selfishness, and yet at some point humans came to realize that we create our best opportunities when we work together. So a moral framework has to be set to regulate our selfish tendencies to result in a society that allows for cooperation. Participating in society means we have to agree to a social contract. We agree to treat each other by a certain standard in exchange for safety and cooperation. I won't kill you if you don't kill me, and we can also prevent that thing out there from killing either one of us. Or I won't steal from you if you don't steal from me, and together we can protect each other's stuff from the bad guy. If someone murders or steals or behaves in a manner that we agree is abhorrent, then they've broken that social contract. They've behaved in an immoral manner and gone against what's best for humanity. Where things get shaky and unclear is when you have multiple tribes of tool users with different agendas. Hitler and Stalin are great examples, albeit overused. There were a lot of people under both who believed that they were in the right and were working together to achieve goals for a society they envisioned. They had a moral code that they believed in, but committed genocidal atrocities because they othered humans that didn't agree with their ideologies or looked different than they did. During the height of colonization, similar atrocities happened under the guise of serving God. According to the Bible, the Israelites slaughtered entire nations of children. God doesn't tame the wild and sadistic nature of man. Knowledge does. I suspect as technology continues to make the world smaller, it'll get harder for us to look at other people as outsiders. There have also been studies that support the idea that some animals have displayed a sense of morality. Despite not receiving any benefit, or sometimes even to their detriment, certain mammals have acted altruistically, or even shown signs of compassion or comfort for another creature in pain. Interestingly enough, primates, who are some of our closest kin in the evolutionary family, can display these traits as well as empathy and have intense social structures. If morality comes from God and is written on the hearts of all mankind regardless of their belief and faith, then why do certain animals display similar characteristics? Please keep in mind that this is a 35,000-mile high discussion on history, morality, and social structures. These are incredibly complex subjects. Way smarter people than I have been discussing these things for a long time and still have a bunch of unanswered questions.
That is such a beautifully pregnant pause that you see right there as he actually comprehends what Frank Turek has said. In this moment, you can see him actually processing that basically his entire life, he has essentially been standing on the shoulders of giants and pretending that he can fly ideologically as it relates to morality. That being said,
I'm not exactly sure what Brandon's point is with this statement. Is he just accusing Kyle of simply relying on non-theists who have come before? This isn't a big deal. It just annoys me that Brandon points this out when it's not like Frank is stating anything particularly new.
I can see where you're coming from. I don't think that God is needed in a sense I'm not looking for perfection. I don't think anybody here is. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for human beings just to simply work together to better society. I don't really see that need for a perfect identity up above.
Okay, I mean, I'm not saying that an atheist can't be a good person. I'm not saying atheists don't know right from wrong. That's not my point. My point is that it seems to me it's difficult to justify what rightness is if everything is reduced to human opinion. Which human gets to decide? Right?
You're right. It is difficult to justify what rightness is. Remember that 35,000-mile high view that I mentioned? If you zoom in on it at all, a lot of questions start cropping up. That's why courts of law exist. Even in a Western society, which is largely built on values that come from Christianity and Judaism, we have countless trials every year to determine whether someone who has killed was justified in doing so. We develop terms to distinguish between killing someone in cold blood, murder, versus killing someone out of self-defense. We even had to come up with degrees of murder. Some countries consider same-sex relations to be immoral and outlaw it, while others don't. Whether Christian or not, it's pretty easy for any sane, empathetic human being to say killing is bad. But theists and non-theists alike have to utilize logic and processes when considering answers to more complex and nuanced scenarios surrounding morality. So, yeah, we still leave a lot of moral quandaries up to the subjectivity of human society. The outcome can largely depend on its social norms. And you know what? Despite a lot of setbacks, and there have been a lot of setbacks, if you look at where we were 1,000 years ago and where we are today, human rights in society are trending in a positive direction.
It's subjective then, as Levi was saying before, it's just in my subjective mind. If there's not an external reference to say that this is good and this is evil, then we're all just here and we're fending for ourselves. Now, a lot of people will say, and I appreciate your question, it's a very good question. A lot of people will say, well, we need to cooperate to get along, right? Actually, that's not true. Take somebody like Stalin. He cooperated with very few people, just his henchmen, and he killed 20 million people to get what he wanted.
Now, I'm no expert on Stalin or the rise of communism, but this seems rather reductionist. First off, Stalin wasn't an island, nor did he only do it with his inner circle alone. He rose to prominence in his early years thanks to his support among the Bolsheviks. When he gained power after the death of Lenin, it was with the support of an inner circle that had means and connections. To say that he wasn't acting in concert with people who shared his ideals is just a bad faith argument. Yeah, Stalin used a twisted form of cooperation to subjugate and slaughter. It was evil. Frank would probably ask me how I could say that if there was no objective arbiter of morality. Because 20 million people died violently at the hands of his regime, Frank. Hitler killed millions and used Christianity as an excuse to do it. He was a bad man twisting religion to suit his ends. Many throughout history have used Christianity as a vehicle to justify violence, yet I doubt Frank would agree if I claimed that faith in God is what caused that brand of violence to happen.
And then he died on his deathbed at the age of 74, shaking his fist at God one last time. He never paid for his sins on this life. Okay.
I find it really weird that Frank brings up the fact that Stalin killed 20 million people, then died on his bed, never paying for his crimes. It feels to me like he's trying to punctuate his point by appealing to our sense of justice. Oh wait, this stain on society is just going to die and not suffer any eternal damnation? How dare he? My brother in Christ, a lot of atheists already consider Christianity a cope. You don't have to give them extra ammunition.
So the problem, it seems to me, is we know, and you know right, and you know what's right and wrong, and I know it too, and I don't need to believe in God to know that. I just need there to be a God to justify it. Let me put it this way. A lot of atheists say, look, I know right from wrong, and I agree with you know right from wrong. But that's like saying, I can know what a book says and deny there's an author, which is true. But there would be no book to read unless there was an author. The same is true when it comes to morality. You can know what the right thing to do is and deny there's a God, but there would be no right thing to do unless there was a God.
In this context, comparing a book to morality is a bad analogy. I can see a book, I can pick it up, I can smell that new book smell, unless it's an old book. I can open its pages and hear that crackling of the spine. I can go to the author's website, check out their interviews online. I can subscribe to their social media or go to a book signing. You get the point. There are so many ways I can verify that the author is real. Or we can just rely on the fact that we've established a certain pattern. If pages are bound together and there's writing in it, logic dictates that someone put it together. There has never been empirical evidence of a book being written without an author. It's an established principle based on experience and evidence. So if someone were to try to build a case that a book had been created without an author, the burden of proof is clearly on them. The same is not true with morality. So far in this video, I've pointed out the fact that we can't even agree on what's moral. Let's also not forget about the examples of altruism among animals. Unlike a book, morality is a tenuous concept. With that in mind, I don't understand why the origin of morality as a loose societal agreement should be considered such a bad take.
That makes sense?
I guess I can see your point, yes.
This guy is such a legend. I love the humility that he shows in this moment where he admits that the logic that he has just been shown by Frank Turek actually does hold up. It actually does make sense. And rather than feeling like he has to just rebut that or has to sort of clap back, if you will, he just listens and actually recognizes that perhaps there is something beneath the assumptions that he has been operating by. There must be a guiding principle beneath those assumptions to actually justify human dignity, to justify human rights. Otherwise, we're in a scenario exactly like he described, which is called moral utilitarianism. It really does boil down to then might makes right, where if the majority can agree on something, then by definition that becomes what is best for the society. The problem with that, and it's interesting that he brought up communism as well, because the problem with this is that you have more death in the 20th century than all other centuries combined through the atheistic regimes that took center stage in human history. I mean, that's a really significant point, that you actually see once God was sort of dethroned from a certain position in society, it created a space where you could have, atheistic, communistic dictatorships that took over, and through that, just a horrific, tremendous amount of death and atrocity.
Nope. I'm going to stop you right there. As stated, this is just flat out wrong for so many reasons. Death by these atheistic regimes? What sort of deaths are you referring to? Do you mean war and murder? You said that the deaths caused by those regimes were more than previous deaths of all other centuries combined? Where are you getting those statistics? According to this chart provided by the Population Reference Bureau, that's just not possible. There have been well over 100 million deaths in the combined past centuries. Maybe you meant that 100 million to be more than all other wars from previous centuries combined? What qualifies as a war? Would that include attacks between ancient villages to steal each other's cows? Who knows how many of those incidents took place throughout history? Would those count? I just don't see the math on this one. Yes, there's no denying the USSR was a bad idea. Maoist China is a bad idea. Nazi Germany is a bad idea. Not atheist or communist, by the way. That much death and atrocity is horrific. I don't need any outside source to tell me that.
The fact that we can agree on that raises the deeper question, which is why can we all agree on that? Why is there such a commonly understood, a common sense approach to morality where we basically know what is right and what is wrong? But how is this possible? How do we have this moral law embedded into our consciousness?
Because death is bad. We don't want our stuff stolen. We believe our young should be taken care of till they're old enough to take care of themselves, etc.
And that raises the bigger question: where did it come from? How do we know? How are we able to determine right from wrong in this way?
I don't know. Evolution seems like a likely candidate.
So it's very interesting, but I really like this young guy, and I like the humility that I see. This actual video is about 8 years old, and so I don't know where he's at now. I just pray that the seeds that were planted this day have been watered and that he would come home to God. In Jesus' name, amen.
Kyle, if you're out there, I sincerely hope you didn't fall for arguments like Frank's. If you did find your way to God, I at least hope you found him through some other means and in a way that actually makes sense for you. Frank, you never answered Kyle's question, so I'm going to ask it again in my own way. You and Brandon have talked about the deaths laid at the feet of atheism, and I've done my best to point out that you can't necessarily blame atheism for the victims of communism any more than you can blame the deaths of countless victims at the hands of the Crusades or colonization. All of those things are simply the twisted machinations of people with bad ideas and evil intent. But what about your guy? In your book, God commands the utter destruction of entire people groups. I've heard arguments about how those nations were so corrupt and wicked that there was no other option to save the people of Israel, but I don't buy it. He condemned the human race to eternal damnation because of the sins of two people. He punished an entire nation because the ruler decided to take a census. He murdered an entire globe's worth of people men, women, children, and animals because he decided they were too wicked and regretted ever making them? He destroyed an entire city because of the sin of a few? In your book, there are rules for how to enslave young women after killing their families? He commands his people to stone kids for disrespecting their parents? How can you worship and revere God when he comes across as a selfish, petulant, flaky thug? How can you claim a framework for morality when the entire framework is broken and founded on contradictions?